The 2018 Ohio State Fair happens July 25th through August 5th. Learn more online, daily schedules, and more. OhioStateFair.com. Go behind the scenes and check out the Ohio State Fair on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and even Pinterest, too.
Hey, Eric. Good. Get back, Murray. Get back.
Hey, puppies.
This is Snippy. This is Murray, and this is Bunny.
Hi, Murray. Hey, Bunny.
Dead silence, as I remember it. Dead silence and shock, and I think we spent the rest of the evening discussing why that probably wasn't a really good idea.
The Ohio State Fair and Wessler Media are proud to present A Fair to Remember, discovering the stories and people behind this statewide tradition. This is Season 1, Episode 6.
A lot of people will measure how a day's going and whether we're having problems or not as to how I'm acting or reacting.
What I attempted to do was go down through the entire listing of entertainers and ID them in terms of the number of times that they appeared and when. And it came out in this sort of fashion.
That's historian Levon Shook from Episode 1. He pulls out a piece of paper, and it's a graph paper. It's got some long handwritten notes on it. It's a list of concerts, and this is a lineup of some serious and old-school heavy hitters.
They got Johnny Cash and June Carter.
Now, she wasn't with him every time.
Okay.
But a total of 11 times.
So Johnny Cash 11 times.
The Osmonds 10 times.
Red Skelton 4
Right.
times? Wow.
Right.
Dolly Parton 5. REO Speedwagon 4. Cheap Trick
6.
Sandy Patty, Christian Artist 4.
Willie Nelson 9. Rascal Flatts 7. So who has performed at the fair the most? The Oak Ridge Boys. So by way of review, the people who have performed the most at the Ohio State Fair is the Oak Ridge Boys 16 times, then you've got Bob Hope 15, and then Johnny Cash ringing in at 11. Other notables on the list, Al Green, Jackson 5, Fats Domino, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and Hot Pursuit. They were a 1980s local band made up of 5 Columbus police officers. Over the years, there have been some real music legends at the Ohio State Fair. Most, if not all, of the shows took place in the fabled grandstand, which was condemned in 1990, and the Celeste Center opened on its site in 1991. But someone has to make these shows happen. Someone has to book the acts, tell people where to be, and so on and so forth. One of those someones is Brett Chance.
I have 2, and you can use whatever. I mean, I'm assistant general manager. I'm one of several that we have, and entertainment director. So for the purposes of this, if you want to call me entertainment director, that's fine.
While many people often help in the selection process, it's Brett's job to pick which bands play each year.
You'll see the evolution of it, where it started with a lot of TV stars would do it. I mean, they had Rin Tin Tin to guys from Bonanza were on there, Dan Blocker and stuff like that. And of course, they'd have the Daredevil show, the Joey Chitwood stuff too. It's interesting to look at that stuff. Red Skelton, a lot of the people that played here did have shows, on TV.
Perhaps the most memorable moment for Brett was in 2017, before the George Thorogood Show. Brett Chance's late father, Dean, was a pitcher for the Los Angeles Angels. He was obviously a really good one, because he won the Cy Young Award in 1964. So George Thorogood is holding court backstage during a meet and greet. Brett, he's nearby and hears some talk revolving around baseball. So knowing this conversation, Brett decides to strike up a conversation with the rocker.
When I went up and introduced myself afterwards, and I said, hey, nice to meet you, glad to have you here. Obviously you're a baseball fan of something. Oh, yeah. I said, have you ever heard of Dean Chance? And he goes, Dean Chance, 1964 Cy Young Award, 1.65 ERA. I mean, it was like, I didn't know if I was being set up. I mean, I don't know, maybe he has one of those photographic, I was stunned.
Preparation for a fair concert starts about 6 to 8 weeks beforehand. One of those people handling logistics is Clay Campbell. He's the president of Triangle Talent, a booking agency.
A lot of people will measure how a day's going and whether we're having problems or not as to how I'm acting or reacting. So if I'm flying off the handle and screaming, then everyone else is going, oh, this is a bad day.
Putting on a show requires attention to thousands of small details, things like ticketing, getting people in and out of the show, lighting, and sound. But even before that, Clay has to think about sound check, getting the band fed, and making sure everybody's happy.
We had Aretha Franklin there a few years ago, and one of the things that Miss Franklin requires is to keep the backstage warm, and she doesn't like air conditioning. She doesn't want air conditioning blowing down on the stage to keep her vocal cords loose. Keep in mind the fair's in end of July, beginning of August, so it's 95 degrees out. We had to bring a portable heater in for her, and then she stayed in her very nice silver mink coat for the entire time. So it was about 120 degrees in the backstage area.
A rocky start to a relationship between a man and his future mother-in-law. The fair and a world-famous country artist got involved.
She has come into the conversation, and it's 12:30, and it's still going strong. And so that's how she found out what was originally going on. And then the next day, we relived the adventure.
That's next on A Fair to Remember. We're back in a minute. So if you missed the history episode, you missed the fact that Cincinnati actually hosted the very first fair in 1850, and that is actually, the fair was actually supposed to happen in like 1849, so it was delayed a year because of Asiatic cholera. So a ton more stories in our history episode, so make sure you go check that one out. And we've got a lot more to come in future episodes as well, including stories with entertainers. So one thing I wanted to say, too, is that also, if you look at like the early days of the fair, it's really interesting just to note how, it was really kind of like the internet in a way. So like the fair was a way for people to exchange information, exchange, maybe wisdom that they've learned in the farm and elsewhere. So things have certainly changed, but what's so cool about the fair today is that it's actually like a hands-on thing where you can really get to know different walks of life and different ways of doing life. So check it out online, ohiostatefair.com. You can see the daily schedules and everything you need to know on there, ohiostatefair.com. Welcome back to A Fair to Remember. I'm your host, Vince Tornero. And if you got a story connected to the fair, we want to hear it. ohiostatefair.com/podcast. Again, ohiostatefair.com/podcast. And make sure, too, you give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts because that'll help other people find what we're doing here. And thanks. The shows at the fair, the concerts, they're a big deal. We've talked about how there's some big acts that have played. We looked into logistically how they happen. But what about on a personal level? Well, Eric Weigel had a big problem on his hands, and he needed some help with his future mother-in-law. Her name, Bernie McLeod. She was a woman who could light up a room. They called her Deanie for short. She sure wasn't short on personality, though. Bernie was a huge Willie Nelson fan. Just huge. So much so that her daughter Nancy was somewhat irked by this.
She was a little bit jealous that, her mother loved Willie as much as she did. And she would come home and there's not a single picture of her in her mother's house. And there's framed pictures of Willie up. Summer of 1984, my wife and I have been dating for probably 6 months or so, and she is, her mother wants to come down to the Ohio State Fair to see Willie Nelson. So we agree to go, and we're students at this point, and so one of my wife's summer jobs was doing the overnight shift at the Ohio State Fair. So part of the deal was after the show, I had to take her mom back to her house while she went to work. So it was my first time seeing Willie Nelson. It was awesome. We have a great time at the show. I take Nance's mom back to her apartment. I'm being polite and go in, have a beer, and she's having wine, and we get to talking, and pretty soon she's had several, I've had several, and I tell her that I'm in love with her daughter, and someday I'm going to marry her. Dead silence and shock, and I think we spent the the rest of the evening discussing why that probably wasn't a really good idea. So her roommate came home at Nance called from the fair to call her roommate because Nance and her mother live in Maumee, Ohio. So Maumee, Ohio is a little bit more Mayberry-ish, and you leave your doors unlocked and you don't even close your front door and that kind of thing. And so she calls her roommate and says, "Hey, I just want to check in to make sure my mom didn't, leave the doors open and that kind of thing." And her roommate is howling as she has come into the conversation, and it's 12:30 and it's still going strong. And so that's how she found out what was originally going on. And then the next day we relived the adventure. The next 6 months or so, Nance's mom really didn't speak to me much and would address me in third person and talk about it. When I'd go visit, it would be, "When is your guest leaving?" and crazy stuff like that.
After that fateful August 1984 evening, the relationship between Eric and his future mother-in-law progressively improved. It was eventually cemented in '86 when entertainment director Brett Chance, a college friend of Eric's, helped a brother in need and got him on the Willie Nelson meet and greet. Superfan Bernie, Eric's mother-in-law, yeah, she was going to meet her idol.
You go back there and there's several folks, in line going through this, and all of a sudden there you are, you're on Willie's bus, and there's Willie, and it's it's a very quick process, but man, you just bask in it for that short period of time. And I told him, I said, "Man, you're gonna get me mother-in-law points forever," and he did. She was a bigger than life character. When she came into her room, she just commanded attention. Big liberal, big out there liberal politically, and loved to spar on politics in a good way, right? Not the way we spar about politics now, but she and Willie were about the same age, so they had like that Stardust period stuff totally resonated for her, and that growing up in those same eras. And in fact, when she was in hospice, she was listening to Willie when she went.
Hey, it's Vince, and as I've said before, I am extremely honored to be able to tell these stories of the Ohio State Fair. The fair is so huge, 168 years old, and you're kind of getting a front seat on what the history of the fair is and getting behind the scenes like no other. It's pretty cool. It's pretty sweet just to be able to sit here and talk with you about all of this. So one of the things that I would really encourage you to do is to go on the fair's Instagram and see what some folks have actually curated over the years. So Steve Ide is actually a collector of Ohio State Fair memorabilia, and you can see it, firsthand right there on Instagram, and also Facebook and Twitter too. There's a lot of updates going on there. So check it out. That's the way to kind of go behind the scenes quickly and actually see more and kind of experience this podcast on a different level. So see some of the people that you're hearing from right here. Go on Instagram. Check it out. Ohio State Fair on Instagram. Hey, if you're liking what you're hearing right now on A Fair to Remember, make sure you leave us a 5-star review. It really helps us get higher in the rankings, and it really shares the stories that you're hearing here with other folks. So really appreciate that. Also, if you got stories that you want to share with us, go to ohiostatefair.com/podcast.
All right, so we're walking up to the barn. We've got the butter cow, and so I guess kind of this is a live preview of what's coming up with the next episode. Is we're going to go in depth with the butter cow and see how they sculpt it, how much butter they use, how much work it takes, how many people this thing takes. So this is going to be fun. We're going to go into the barn and, or I guess it's the dairy building is what they call it. So yes, let's correct that. The dairy building. All right, so let's walk in here, and this will be cool because actually, it will be cool because it's like really cold inside the inside of the dairy area, the cooler. All right, so yeah, so that's what's coming up on the next episode of A Fair to Remember, and make sure you keep on sharing the episodes because we've got a ton of more stuff coming up, a few more episodes here. So, all right, I'm here at the dairy barn, so let's go in, and you'll hear more on the next episode of A Fair to Remember.
Blackman from Cleveland, Ohio.
A Fair to Remember is presented by the Ohio State Fair and produced by Wessler Media. Shout out to executive producer and PR manager for the fair, Alicia Schultz. She gave me the great opportunity to help tell these stories. Special thank you to Levon Shook, Brett Chance, Clay Campbell, and Eric and Nancy Weigel. This episode lovingly dedicated to the memory of Bernie Deanie McLeod. These episodes are expertly mastered by Joey Gerwin at Orange Judio Recording Studios. And finally, thank you to anyone who's done anything at all to help make this podcast a reality. And thank you for attending the fair because you too are part of this great tradition. This has been A Fair to Remember. I'm your host, Vince Tornero, and I'll see you on the Midway.
In '62, Red Skelton had a concert in someplace out in the Midwest. On a flight to Chicago, he had a sum of money on his person of over $25,000. It came up missing. Now, he kept that much money on hand because if he had a sudden cancellation, he would be able to pay off the people who were in his crew without having to go to a bank. But anyway, he lost $25,000. So he came to the state fair here in Columbus a couple of days early, somewhat saddened.
Looking for a hot bowl of soup.
That's what it amounted to, yes.